Okay, we'll get started. Good morning. My name is John Von Paris, and I am chairman for the MDTA Finance Committee. I hereby call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order at 9:01 a.m. In accordance with the live streaming law, this meeting is being conducted via video conference and is being live streamed on the MDTA Finance Committee webpage. All members will have their video active during the entirety of the meeting. I ask that anyone who is presenting or answering a question to please turn your video and audio on when speaking. When you are done, please turn your video off and put your audio on mute. To minimize background noise during the call, I would ask that everyone on the line please mute your phone except when speaking. There are no members of the public, no elected officials, and no media who have pre-registered to comment at this morning's meeting. At this time, we will begin with agenda item number 1. Just want to comment, this will be agenda item number 1. The approval of the minutes, of course, will be the only agenda item requiring approval, but the next 3 are updates, of course, and everyone knows, but they're very important updates. And so we will begin with agenda item number 1, the seeking approval of the open meeting minutes from August 9th, 2022. August 9th, 2022. Is there a motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Motion carries. Feedback. Getting feedback. Let me see something here. I'm going to try to dial this down a little bit here. Okay. And we will move on to agenda number 2, an update from Jeffrey Brown, the budget comparison. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is Jeffrey Brown. I'm the budget director for the MDTA, and I'm here today to provide an update to the full year 2022 operating budget performance. For the full year ending on June 30th, we had spent 90% of the budget versus a target of 100%. Except for Object 13, all objects were below the targeted spending level. The key drivers for this performance are the reduced or the personnel vacancies and the costs associated with them, and order delays, typically due to supply chain issues around COVID-19. Moving on into some detail, the salaries and wages, objects 1 and 2, are below budget at 93% spend. Again, the big driver of this are the employee vacancies, which account for most of the performance in these 2 objects. Moving on to communications, object 3, we were at an 85% spend. Telecommunications 303 is at a 61% spend, and again, vacancies drove this performance. State paid telecommunications, object 305 is at a 92% spend, and that accounts for most of the performance in object 3. This line item contains the state radio system invoice, which came in under budget by $200,000. Object 4, travel, is below budget at 52%. The ongoing effects of the pandemic, which increased teleworking, telelearning, postponement of in-person conferences, all this drove the underspend in this area. Fuel and utilities is below budget at 78% spend. The main driver is electricity, 620 at 69% spent. This was driven by the LED replacements and toll booth removals, which reduced our electricity needs. Object 7, motor vehicle operations, was below budget at an 89% spend. The primary driver is the delay in orders for vehicle or delivery of orders for vehicle purchases. These costs will most likely be rolled over into full year 2023. There was some partial offset due to increased fuel costs. It was at an 119% spend in Object 702. This is a result of the inflationary environment we've seen for the last half to full year. Contractual services, Object 8, is below budget at an 88% spend. Some of the key variances were advertised at 48%. Ongoing COVID-19 impacts curtailed certain outreach efforts and partnerships, so this reduced the spend. Equipment repairs or maintenance was at 63% spend, primarily to a portion of the funding of $622,000 that was budgeted in this object was actually charged to Object 1033. A little more detail behind that. This was really one fund cert that was split between two objects. In total, it came in at budget, but the split between the objects was, had some variances. Building repairs and maintenance, 812 is below budget at an 86% spend. It's a combination of, we went to in-house sludge removal, which was less expensive, and there was a shift to construction spending, which impacted the operating budget, and there were delayed billings that we expect to be rolled into next year. Janitorial service was below at 71%. This was the Key Bridge being shut down for a time, which limited Key Bridge campus shut down for a time, which limited janitorial access. Education training, which was below at a 47% spend. Again, cancellation and suspension of various programs due to COVID-19 drove this underspend. Management studies is below budget at 89%, primarily due to reduced requests for studies and certain financial advisor services. Security services was below spend with a 51% spend. Two areas, there was contractual security services in the police headquarters, which was under budget by $352,000. Also, we no longer have armored car cash pickup services at the toll booth, so that reduced costs by $260,000. Fiscal services and retail fees, 829 was below budget at 74%. This was below due to the backlog and processing of NOTDs. The primarily IT objects, which is 841 through 869, were below at 81%. This was primarily driven by turnover and contractual personnel turnover. We essentially did the work with less personnel available or resources available. Easy Pass Service Center costs, 873 is at a 94% spend, which was close to budget. This underspend is really a net between the budget assumptions we had versus the actual spending. Supplies and materials were 88% spent. Roadway maintenance materials, 905 is 51%. This was due to the shift to ongoing construction activity, which reduced supplies and materials. Salt was reduced at 62% due to the mild winter. Uniforms was at a 77% spend. These were some supply chain issues and the timing of orders coming in, so that drove that underspend. Ammunition is at 158% spent, and this was the annual TASER contract, which occurred in the first quarter, plus some additional purchases that went through asset forfeiture for ammunition. Replacement equipment at Object 10 was below budget at 68%. This was associated with the delays in the Nice Middleton Bridge, which reduced spending in this object. These funds are expected to be rolled into next year. Additional equipment Object 11 was 37% spend. Again, as mentioned before, timing of equipment orders. And again, these expenses are expected to be rolled into next year. Finally, fixed objects is over at 103% spend. And this is primarily due to the costs associated with excess property liability costs, which increased by 30%. And this is a reflection of the insurance market at this time. At this point, that concludes my presentation. I'd be glad to take any questions you have at this time.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So first, it looks like we did not end the employees' retirement and Object 1. That our year-to-date expense was 70,841 versus budget of 13.2 million. So how is that not going to be spent, or is that located somewhere else?
I'm sorry, which object were you looking at again?
So in Object 1, number Object 1600161, employees retirement. Budget,
right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's a trickier one to explain because it's hard to look at one specific item because these Fringe costs, we budget to the specific line, but not all the costs that wind up getting charged for that fringe winds up in that same line. That winds up in burden expense, which is 171, where you can see that there's no budget, but there's large expense. So I would have to go back and look at some specific detail to see if, if the assumptions are aligned, but just looking at this schedule, it's hard to tell, whether it's up, above, or below, because some of those costs are associated in the burden costs. So you almost have to look at them in total. That makes sense.
So
but I can certainly go back and look at a little more detail on the assumption.
So it's basically, the vast majority is in the Social Security contract, health insurance, retirees, health insurance, and employees' retirement, it looks like. And if you add a lot of those up, it's much of the burden.
Yeah, right. But what you'd really do is you'd want to add up, Social Security, health insurance, retirees, and health insurance, and all those things, like roughly 151 through 174, 71, or 75, including burden, and then compare that to the budget to get a better feel. Or in addition, go back and see what, some of the assumptions and what they came out to. You'd have to drill into it. But just looking at this schedule, it's hard to kind of tease that out.
Okay.
And I'm certainly can go back though and look at that detail a little bit more, just to give you a better feel and kind of maybe put together a schedule to see maybe how it lines up a little bit better.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. I see what the total for the object is, and clearly we're under budget, which is fine. So for most of these items, it sounds like these are one-time savings, or that we will budget differently for going forward. There are not too many rollovers. Is that accurate? I heard you say rollover a couple of times, but not for very significant items.
Right. A couple things. One, I would say that anything associated with purchases, which are typically vehicles and sometimes uniforms, and think the purchases got delayed, those will be rolled over in most instances. They just didn't show up because of supply chain issues. So those will definitely show up. Others, like the personnel vacancies, that's a tougher one. That's just a function of how quickly and when we can hire. And in some cases, are we going to hire because, you went to all electronic tolling and things of that nature. So that's not a direct, that's going to roll over. That's more of a, as you said, kind of a one-time effect. But how big that is, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Member Ardinger, I had a question. I put up the wrong emoji. Sorry about that. It's supposed to be a hand. I think this is similar to what Member Rosen was asking, because I'm looking at some of these percentages, the higher percentages from what was budgeted and what was the actual spend. And so one of them that I was looking at was 111, where the spend is at 1,168% for accrued leave payment. Does that play into, you see where
I believe, no, that would be slightly different if I'm trying to remember on this one. I believe that's where like retirement stuff that's accrued leave gets paid out of. So if there's greater retirements during the year, that's what would show up. I believe that's correct for that object, which is why you would see an increase, because I think there was some issues in terms of people retiring. So that's where that would show up.
So would you say that there was a greater number of retirements than was expected when preparing the budget?
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense. And then the other one that I was looking at, not a big dollar amount, but still the percentage seemed high, was the bad debt expense, 1320.
Yes. That I'd have to go back and look at the detail and pull maybe some invoices. As it stands right now, I don't have the detail on that, but typically what's in that is things like, and I do know where it's occurring. It's like the Fort McHenry Tunnel, it's the Intercounty Connector, it's the JFK Highway. And typically sometimes there's accidents and there's costs associated with doing repairs, and insurance should be covering that. And there's claims against that, and they won't pay that for whatever reason. So typically, something like that is what's occurring in that. For this specific one, I don't know. I'll have to go and pull some invoices and look at that.
Right. So it's sort of something that you can't really budget for. It's an incident that one incident may drive it up, in other words.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Jeffrey, I have a quick question. It's not, a huge issue, but you mentioned on the insurance, the excess property liability,
Yes.
and that's kind of, it's a 30% increase. What
Yes.
is, do you know any more detail on that? I'm just curious.
The detail I have, and I would have to get more detail. What I do know, like I said, this was from, I think, a few months ago. I had asked the question. This is typically we don't, I guess, self-fund for things like tunnels, raised roadways, bridges. So we have to purchase additional liability insurance for those areas. And my understanding is just the insurance market, given the environment we've been in, has been extremely volatile, and they've been passing on large expenses. Beyond that, I'd have to get more detail as why they felt they had to increase the expenses that much, but that's what's driving that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Jeffrey from any members? Okay, if not, then we will move on. Jeffrey, thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
For your presentation. Thanks for all you. Thanks also for all you do for the authority.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to agenda item number 3. Jeannie, with the budget comparisons for the review of our actual versus projected fiscal year 2022 capital budget spending. Good morning, Jeannie.
Good morning. I'm reporting on the actual fiscal year 22 capital spending against the fiscal year 22 capital budget in the fiscal year 22 through 27 draft consolidated transportation program. And this information will also be presented to the board to the full board on September 29th. As of June 30th, 82.3% of the fiscal year 22 budget was spent as compared to the targeted spending level of 100%. The total budget for fiscal year 22 was $602.9 million, and the actual spending through the fourth quarter was $496.2 million. 9 of the 95 projects budgeted in fiscal year 22 were within the acceptable spending limits of 90 to 110%, which is plus or minus 10% of the target. And this variation is decreased from the 25% reported for the first, second, and third quarters because all allocations, accruals, and fiscal year 22 invoices were posted. Actual spending through the fourth quarter for 8 projects budgeted for more than $10 million each in fiscal year 22 was $330.2 million. And if we look at attachment A, we see that the total budget for those 8 projects for fiscal year 22 was $410.8 million. The actual spending for these projects was $330.2 million, which puts us at an 80% spend rate for these 8 projects. And just as a reminder, the spend rate on these is only for fiscal year 22, and these budgets as total budget for each project, this does not indicate that they're over or under budget. Actually, I do know that none of them are over budget currently. Do you have any questions?
Any questions? It appears that we do not this time. Jeannie, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. And thank you as well as for all you do for MDTA. The we will move on to the last item on the agenda, item number 4. And Cheryl will provide an update, quarterly update on traffic and revenue. Cheryl, good morning.
Good morning. Trying to get my camera.
A little tricky this morning
Oh,
with the
I got the
cameras, I
camera
think.
Okay. All right. I think I got that.
There you are.
Okay, good morning, members. For the record, I'm Cheryl Lewis-Orr, Revenue Director for Maryland Transportation Authority. And the purpose of this agenda item is to update the committee on traffic and revenue performance through June 30th, 2022. Some key takeaways for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2022, revenue underperformance aligned with expectations and will not impact our ability to maintain our financial standards, including significantly exceeding the 2 times debt service coverage policy. And key contributors to underperformance are not expected to impact our future traffic and revenue forecast, except known revenue reductions from the customer assistance plan. In summary, for the period ended June 30th, 2022, total revenue was $803.7 million, which is $19.2 million below the official forecast. And we mentioned at the May quarterly transaction and revenue update meeting, we projected we would be somewhere between 20 and 25 million below forecast. And we've come in slightly a bit better than that at 19.2 million. Again, this underperformance will not impact our ability to maintain our financial standards. On page 2 of the memo, we list some primary drivers of the underperformance, and those are the continued impact from the overstatement of the forecast at 37.7 million, lower than forecasted video tolls and pay-by-plate collections of 13.5 million. We did have higher than forecasted Easy Pass and administrative toll revenue and collections that offset some of the underperformance at 25.8 million. And there were certain transactions that weren't included in the forecast at 9.8 million, and this also offset some of the underperformance. An update on our customer assistance plan. As of August 28, 2022, $67.4 million of civil penalties had been waived because of roughly 444,000 customers paying $17.6 million in outstanding video tolls. And just as a reminder, the official forecast issued by CDM Smith is on a cash basis to mirror the MDTA's trust agreement revenue recognition requirement. And attached to this memo are attachments B and C. They analyze toll revenue performance by comparing actual revenue collected on a cash basis to the official forecast by the facility and payment method, respectively. Any questions? Okay, I'll continue on to the second portion of this agenda item. And the purpose of this memo is to provide the committee with a quarterly and year-to-date update regarding traffic and toll revenue trends compared to the previous year and the forecast. Some key takeaways. While our passenger car traffic levels showed a slight decline in the fourth quarter of 2022 compared to the previous quarter, it does continue to track closely to pre-pandemic levels, and this can be seen in the attached fourth quarter report on page 2. If you look at that chart, the commercial vehicle traffic continues to outperform pre-pandemic levels. That can also be seen in the same figure on page 2 of the attached fourth quarter report. Transactions and revenue nearly doubled during fiscal year 2022 due to the ongoing recovery in traffic from the pandemic and collections of delayed notices of toll due. The chart on page 2 of this memo shows actual transactions were below forecast by 7.6 million or 4.3%. And again, revenue was below forecast by 19.2 million or 2.3%. Primary drivers were outlined above. System-wide, our year-over-year performance nearly doubled for transactions and revenue. Transactions increased by 80.8 million or 91.3%, and revenue increased by 366.2 million or 83.7%. More specifically, if you turn to page 4 of the attached fourth quarter report, you'll note on table 1, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2022, our EasyPass transactions increased by 65.7 million or 78.7%, and NOTD collections increased by 15.1 million transactions or 302%. And on the next page, 5, on table 2, the corresponding revenue for EasyPass increased by 258.4 million or 66.7%, and NOTD revenue increased by 100.3 million or 327.1%. Administrative toll revenue increased, that's not on the table, but administrative toll revenue increased by 7 million or 38.7% compared to last year. Again, this increase was due to ongoing recovery in traffic from the pandemic and collections of delayed notices of toll due. And that concludes this presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Cheryl. There's certainly a lot of moving parts, a lot of information, a lot of moving parts. We're talking, in all of this. I mean, we coming off of the pandemic. We're talking about looking into trying to forecast, what new policies potentially are going to be in place with remote work with employers, and then of course the commercial traffic, if that's going to maintain going forward. I know we're looking at the information that you dated here, and then of course the customer service plan. I have a few questions. I guess I'll on the customer service plan and how all the numbers that you shared work out, and maybe we could get a report at the next meeting, or maybe we can. Maybe Will or someone can help us with that. It's just my thoughts. But anyway, any other questions from any other members?
Yeah. So, Member Von Paris, I was actually going to ask questions on that related to the customer assistance plan. So, given that we waived 67.4 million in civil penalties versus 19.2 million less in actual revenue. Now, I understand that that's through 19.2 is through June 30th, and the 67.4 is through the end of August, so another couple of months approximately. But Cheryl, I don't know if you can answer this, but would it be fair to say, were it not for the customer assistance plan and waiving those penalties, that we would have been closer to our budget for the year? Because we presumably would have collected multi-millions of dollars of penalties.
That is correct. We would have been, had it not been for waiving those civil penalties. That would have been, we would have seen it in administrative revenue, but we would have been far above the 7 million compared to last year. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
I think it's worth adding to, if I may, just briefly, that it also, the customer assistance plan, a major element of it isn't just the waiver of the civil penalty, which has a revenue impact. It's also that we've suspended the escalations to collections and for vehicle suspension, the registration suspensions with the MVA, that both of those actions, unfortunately, historically, there's always a percentage of customers that it becomes necessary to use those actions in order to collect the video toll itself. And so in the absence of those actions, there are, you'll note that the memo also references that we're behind on our video collections as well. And so, obviously, the customer assistance plan ends on November 30th, and it will be necessary for us to resume those kinds of actions in order to encourage certain customers to make the payments on their video tolls as well.
Thank you for that, Will.
Member
any
Von
other-
Paris,
Yes. Member Carroll.
just a question, follow-up question to Will's statement or comments rather. If I'm hearing that correctly, Will, we've waived the penalties, which I assume in the vast majority of those cases are legitimate penalties that would have been incurred by the customer. We waived the penalties, which negatively impacted revenue, and then we disempowered the mechanism that would have been a forcing mechanism to collect the revenue that we otherwise would have been entitled to.
So our escalation process kind of works like a waterfall, if you can. So the first step is we send somebody their video toll for driving without an Easy Pass on our facility or having insufficient funds on their Easy Pass in order to have an active account. They generate that video toll. If they don't pay the toll on time, then they get a civil penalty. If they don't pay the civil penalty on time, then depending on the amount of accrued tolls and civil penalties, we have different paths to either escalate them to Central Collections Unit for collections activities or to MVA for registration suspension. Unfortunately, the waiver of the civil penalty, the way that it was set up, it's set up to first only waive the civil penalty if the video toll is paid. But what I'm getting at is unfortunately, some customers, in order to get them to pay the video toll in the first place, those further down the waterfall collections and suspension activities are necessary in order to get them to pay. And so, we never in practice really want to issue civil penalties. We want everybody to just simply pay their valid tolls. But unfortunately, even the incentive of waiving civil penalties is not enough of a carrot for some folks to pay that original video toll. And unfortunately, you need to bring in the stick that will make them move on that action.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Will. A lot of good discussion here. Obviously, some more questions. Any other questions today by the board members, from the board members? Okay. Then we will, okay, Cheryl, thank you very much. We appreciate the presentation. And thanks for all you do for MDTA.
Thank you.
Okay, well, as I said, there was a short agenda, but important information in here. So appreciate all the members attending today. Everything on the agenda has been covered. And that brings us to, I guess, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Member Carroll, thank you. Second.
Member Artinger, I'll second.
Thank you, Member Artinger. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.